We are so glad you joined us today to Get Centered, but we have a disclaimer. Being centered really is more of an aspiration than a destination. This is a vodcast where we'll be discussing all things mind and body, mental health, physical well-being, parenting, marriage, healthy touch, anger and how to handle it. What is integrative medicine? How do I meditate? What are we learning from COVID in this quarantine experience? Where do we go from here? You have questions on these topics, and we ask those same questions ourselves. So this isn't a vodcast full of answers. It's one full of discussion, because we're going to tell you right now we do not have all the answers, but we do love a rich discussion and hope you do too. We're Leila Scott and John Price, the founders of the Center for Healing Arts and Sciences, and this vodcast is hosted by our amazing team, which is comprised of an integrative group of therapists offering individual, couples, family, depth therapy, and offers support groups for men, women, teens, young professionals, and others. Chinese medicine practitioners offering acupuncture, herbal medicine, food therapy, lifestyle advice, and last but not least, our mindfulness meditation and spirituality guide. Be sure to reach out to us to let us know other topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or to let us know if you'd like to work with our integrative team. We are here for you and offering virtual care as well as home delivery of wellness self-care packages during this time of physical separation. Give us a shout at 713-526-4444 and be sure to follow us on social at Center for HAS. And now, please enjoy the show.
Welcome to you listening, and welcome to everybody here. We've got an interesting project here to explore the depths of our psyches and our behavior. And certainly if you're alive, you're aware of the chaos that's in the world and the collision of ways of behaving, ways of viewing the world, worldviews, and race has been a primary topic because there was somebody murdered, and it's at the forefront of all of our minds. And I think that the degree of helplessness that I feel and confusion, but also activation, a desire to listen, to learn, and to ask questions and have hard conversations. And so the folks that are here are ready to have hard conversations. And we've brought along two friends, Shavonnah Schreiber here, and she'll introduce herself in a second, and then Debra Mouton, who's been a friend for a while, and both amazing thinkers. And we've brought them on to Get Centered today because we want to stir the pot, but mainly we want to listen. So I want to give Shavonnah maybe you a few seconds or minutes to introduce yourself, and then Debra, you go after that. Everybody here has already introduced ourselves in the Get Centered platform. So once you guys do that, let's get asking and listening. Shavonnah?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me on today. You opened this very well. This is a somber time in our history, but I also think definitely a time of activation. Mm-hmm. And I am a marketer. I'm a communicator. Even before I really knew what a marketer was, I've always been a communicator, native Houstonian, and I own a marketing agency here in Houston, where we really spend a lot of our time thinking. Most of our time here at work, we're thinking about how we can help the clients that we work with better communicate their brand, their value, reach their people, their audience. So that's what we spend a lot of time doing. And aside from what I do here for a living, I'm married, I'm a Black woman, native Houstonian, I'm married to a white man, I'm Christian, also a seeker, and I would characterize myself as one who's very open and curious and always at least aims to understand first and then be understood. And so as I have grappled with everything that's happening in our country right now, a lot of things have come up, a lot of things that for me and my experience as a native Houstonian and a Black woman are things that I've known for a while, and I'm having some really interesting conversations and realizing that there's more that I can learn, even with that being said, and then there's definitely things I can do to help others have a safe space to talk and ask questions, because I really do think that the curiosity and the willingness to ask is step one.
Yeah.
Getting us to a point of healing and reconciliation and some sort of a path forward. So thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And full disclosure, you know, you're part of our team and we're part of yours now because
Yeah,
we're one of those people that you're helping to to get
that's right.
our identity clear so that we can connect with the people that are looking for us. And thank
That's
you.
right.
So Deborah, you know, you and I shared a lovely conversation on the podcast. It seems like a long time ago now, but it probably wasn't that long ago. And you've been my teacher already, and so I feel a sense of honor that you're here again to stir the pot with us. Would you stay?
No, thank you for having me. It's an honor just to be able to kind of come in today and plug into the wonderful work you all are already doing. And you know, the biggest part of this is starting the conversations that will hopefully lead us to new actions and new change. So, to introduce myself, my name is Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton. I'm the Poet Laureate Emeritus of Houston, Texas. I'm an artist, a writer, a mom, a wife, right? A Black woman in America, which is really, really complicated sometimes. And I think I'm also, you know, just like Shavonnah said, kind of a thinker and someone who's always sat back and kind of evaluated the world around me and tried to figure out what part I can play in making it better. And so I think today I'm just really excited to maybe start thinking on grander terms. You know, I think right now there is almost like an unveiling for a lot of people of really realizing what has been happening beneath the surface for a long time. And there's need to, you know, wrestle with that and to also figure out how do we move forward. And so I'm really excited just to figure out how we do that.
Well, I certainly want to go where you too want to go. But my first question, though, and I'll open it up for anybody else that has a question, is what has your experience been like through the recent weeks, but also just wherever you want to start there. I mean, let's dive in. Shavonnah, you want to start?
I'll start. So what's interesting, and I think what, you know, you talk about unveiling, Deborah, I think well said, because so I describe, you know, who I am, generally speaking, at the start during my intro, but also, I mean, I went to University of Arizona. I went to University of Oklahoma first and University of Arizona. I was, as a matter of fact, one of the people that I think really played a part in my shaping as an adult was a man that I met through Campus Activities Council at University of Oklahoma, who was like, we're going to make you Miss OU. Now, what's interesting is that at OU, there was also a Miss Black OU, but that's not what he said. The reason I bring that point up is because my personal experience, me, Shavonnah, hasn't been super difficult, quite frankly. And I actually feel like I have felt historically more discrimination around me being a woman than me being Black in general, if I had to separate the two. So for me too, I feel like, wow, I have, because of a lot of things and a lot of people perhaps, had an experience that might be more unique than I realized. Honestly, it may, my personal experience may have been more unique than I historically have realized. And so that's been something that I personally have been, you know, thinking about and wrestling with. I think that's a really good term. And so, but with that being said, I've always known, because how can I not know? I mean, I'm Black, I show up Black, there's no, it is what it is. And unapologetically, but then I tether that to, well, then my experience has been more positive or neutral, you know, let's say. But what about for people, brown people, Black people, who've not had this same experience? So even me as a Black woman, I mean, I think that's too, is sometimes a mistake that is easily made, is to assume that everyone has had a similar experience, or everyone has experienced this particular thing, and that's just not true. And I'm from Texas, right? People think, you know, my friends who live other places are like, oh my gosh. I'm like, no, actually it's been quite fine here, but we live in Houston, also a bit of a different place compared to some other cities. So yeah, that's my sentiment on my personal experience. It's been definitely not as traumatic for sure, and not as painful as I know people who look exactly like me have experienced. So that's something, right? That's something that I'm sitting with.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think I've probably had the other experience, which is, you know, my mother grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama in the 50s and 60s. And I was raised in a household that was very aware of race from a very young age. I was raised in Los Angeles, California, or near about the Inland Empire. And it was like riddled with racism, right? I've been dealing with this from a very young age. And so for me to really kind of come into this, it sounds like a broken record, right? This is the thing that we've been hearing and I've been writing about for years, right? And not just myself, there's been plenty of writers writing about this. And so the last few weeks have been really kind of weird, you know. I've thought a lot about historic events and things that have happened, things like the Holocaust, things that, you know, internments and things like that, and started to think about, you know, the people who weren't affected and what the life was like for them every day, because it seems that there's times where I'm completely just detached from society, and there's times where I'm overwhelmed by it. And so I think, you know, when I wake up in the morning and I get my kids breakfast and we're watching Sesame Street and, you know, we're doing arts and crafts and, you know, it's very easy to feel like there is no danger until we turn on the television or until we open a door, right? Until we drive down our street and see Trump pin signs, right? Until we are completely inundated everywhere with our Blackness and with the threat of what that means. I think for me, you know, I definitely, like Shavonnah said, I've had this differentiator between being a woman and being Black. But for me, it's been much more of like a layer, right? Is that I realize that my womanness gives me access to certain emotions, feelings, and experiences, and that my Blackness sometimes contradicts those same emotions, feelings, and experiences, and that we're trying to always find kind of a way to mitigate between the two of them. And I definitely agree that we're not, you know, this kind of just one note story. And I think that's kind of sometimes what makes it hard, you know. It's really hard to mobilize with people who all come from different backgrounds, experiences, hold different traumas and hurts, react differently. And I think that like that's probably the hardest part of trying to organize, you know, a community to move us in a direction when everyone doesn't necessarily agree with one singular direction.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that is the reason why I started by saying listening, even within the Black community, right? So I am a Black woman, so I go, not here lately because they've been closed, but used to, a Black hair salon, right? I'm married to a white man. I'm in a Black hair salon and someone's making a comment about a racist, you know, could be racist comment. But I'm also me. And so I have tools of communication to be able to ask questions and engage and maybe get them to see a different perspective, maybe not, but I feel comfortable saying that. Then I think about, what about people who aren't like me, who don't have the same tools or the makeup that I have as far as personality, that will say, well, what do you mean by that? Or even to know the right question. You know, what if I were a person and it were the other way around and someone said something that was racist, but it was against Black people or any other non-white person, and they didn't have the confidence or even just the words, the language to be able to explore. It didn't feel safe. Even if they had all those things, but it didn't feel safe, how that could just set you on a trajectory for a completely different experience in life. So that's the thing, right? So I think that's also the thing that is difficult to think about and really to grapple with, is that we haven't listened well. And we don't all have tools and language to even be able to articulate. I mean, we're on with a poet, so you do, of course, Debra, but many people can't even really articulate how they feel. So if you yourself can't even really say how this makes me feel. I told someone, you know, I've woken up every day for the past 7 days with this feeling of a pit in my stomach. I know that that's anxiety. That's like, what am I anxious about? Like, but even the fact that I can go through those steps, oh, I feel a pit in my stomach. That's anxiety. What am I anxious about? Oh, I know I explained to my mother, who thinks, well, why are people protesting? You didn't damn vote, so you don't protest. That's what she said. And I said, well, hold on, because here are the reasons why people protest. And yes, you're right, people vote. People don't vote. That's an issue we have to tackle. But Mom, you also have tools and resources and things that you access to things that help you, that you can't assume everybody has. So while I've been going to vote since I was a child, like I thought everybody voted, because since I was a little kid, I would go with my my mom or whoever was going to the polls, and just be there with them. And then I realized, no, a lot of people don't vote. And a lot of people have never, ever, like it wasn't a part of what they talked about in their household. That's access that I had that I didn't even realize, because I didn't realize until I started talking to people and realized that it was different experiences for other folks. So I think that, it's this lack of listening, which is layered with a lot, right? A lot of historical implications where people feel like, well, no one wants to listen. Because I've said these words like, Deborah, you just said, well, I've been talking about this for years. Why is it new now? Why is this different than it was before? So yeah, I mean, I think that's something too about this more recent experience that I've been dealing with. It's just like, why is it different for people now, non-Black people, than before? I mean, I have my thoughts, but I want to know, what do y'all think? What makes it different for you now than 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when Black Lives Matter first started?
I think, I'm sorry. I would just say, I think one of the issues we run into as well is what makes things different is, this is not a singular thing. It's now compiled with this pandemic, right? That people were already anxious about and already stressed about, and also really like quieted down. The world is a very quiet place right now in a lot of ways. Definitely we have the bustles of our own homes and things like that, and the balance, and but we're looking outward to try to find a way to reconnect. And so that desire in us that says, oh, I need to connect with people, then draws us to be more open to listen, right? And more open to, entertain ideas that maybe we never thought we would agree with. And I think that's also compiled, things like we see, domestic violence rates increase in homes, and other things where we're starting to see these pressures kind of build even in the house. My husband and I were talking, and I'm married to a Black man, and that's its own other thing to navigate, of, just us being able to communicate in the last few days and realizing that even the fears that we share individually are not the same as each other, and so I think that for me, the pressures of the pandemic have almost incited another fury that has helped this movement move a little faster. People who wanted to just get out, well, now they had a reason to get out with a cause to march for, right? And so now they find themselves being drawn to do the thing that almost satisfies this kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Of just like needing to get out, but to be able to engage and to be able to connect and do these things that we know as humans we just need for livelihood. And I think it's just kind of made the perfect storm that says now may be the time that we're able to, really affect change.
Well, Deborah, and before Layla, Scott, I know you have a comment, but one thing I want to interject, the reason that I mentioned the why now is because on the other side, I agree. I feel like this is the trifecta of, I know this was recorded, so I probably can't cuss, but shit show, kind of like this is everything. It's all happening at the same time. And people, and we're quieter. But here's the thing. I know I've had conversations with Black people who say, I don't care. This has been happening. Why? It has been happening. So there are people who feel like, oh, okay, so now you're paying attention because you don't have anything else to do. So do you really care about what's happening, or does it just give you something to do because, yeah, like this has been happening and you knew about it because it was on the news, and you knew about it because there was a whole movement started around it, and you didn't say shit at all. So yeah, I get this is a pandemic, but there's been this issue for a lot longer than now. So, which can undermine, I think, some of the good that people are trying to do that really are genuine, because there are people who feel like, I've been talking about this for 15 years or 10 years or 5 years. You've not said word one until now. Why? What's different now? Pandemic. Oh, so it's different because something that affects you directly is now causing you to pay attention. So it's complicated on that side too.
Do you guys have that in your experience where like non-Black people are calling you and saying what's going on, and like how is that? How is that?
Oh my goodness! Can I just? I know I've been talking a lot. Can I just answer?
Oh, that's what you're here for.
I have never had this many of my non-Black friends calling me daily to say things like, "Have you had water today? Like, are you taking care of yourself? Are you making space for yourself today?" I'm like, yes, I'm making space for myself the same way I've been making it for myself when you didn't call me. And there's a part of me that wants to push back, right? And wants to say, where were you when, and insert, 700 other instances. And I'm trying to like kind of silence that part of me and just say, if these people are now ignited in this new wave of compassion, like, can I give myself to it as well, right? Can I allow them to be better people, allow them to evolve in this way, allow them to care, even if it's just for this moment in time in history, right? Is there a way that I can fully let myself enjoy the joy of that without having to undermine it by all of the skepticism that maybe has played, through all my experience that wants to come out and talk? And so, yeah, absolutely. I've been getting daily emails, daily calls of people doing a myriad of things, checking in on me, sharing my work that they've never shared or discussed my work before, whether that's videos or actual photos of poems, just really engaging with me in ways that I'm like, where were you when the book came out? And then people trying to leverage privilege, right? Of saying like, oh, well, I've recommended you to write an article for so-and-so, we were talking and we thought that you would be a good fit. And I'm like, you've known these people for how long and had this connect, and you've known me and the work that I've done for how long, but now felt like the right time because something in you said, I need to make space for people that I've never made before.
Deep, what's your suspicion there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my suspicion is always going to be that there's something that they're getting out of it, right?
Yeah.
But if we're really honest, a lot of acts of charity come from ego, right? I mean, it is our egotistical nature that says we need to, be a good person. And because of that thing in us, we do nice things. And whether that's something that you evaluate with a critical eye or whether you see that as the way that we're programmed, I think that there's always a way to look at that with a little skepticism of saying, are you doing this because you genuinely feel like the work that I do is valuable, or are you doing this because I'm the most accessible non-threat to you in this current time and position?
I have a response, or I want to add to that before. So I'm holding up this book, Simplicity. I think it's excellent. By Richard Rohr. A lot of people have a lot of different things and feelings about Richard Rohr because he calls things, in my opinion, as they are as it relates to the Western church, right? I'm Christian. So to the point that you made, Deborah, I found myself last Thursday and I'm not a crier, right? While I'm curious, but I'm not, that's just not usually what I do. So I was in the shower and I started crying, like, why am I crying? And so I'm, go through this exploration. I have a 6-minute commute from my house to, garage to this garage. And I cried like 3 times. I'm like, what is going on here? And what I realized is that I had to pray for myself. And this is what I had to pray. I had to pray that I didn't let the feelings that could come up that could so easily go to hatefulness, go to, I'm very direct in my communication, so very almost biting, stinging. So why are you calling me now? You've known me since 2003. Like those are things I could say in my shadow self. Like those are absolutely in my repertoire things to say. But to push that down, because I was like, you know what? Sometimes we can do the right thing for the wrong reason. And you know what? No judgment here, whatever. Because if we can at least start the conversation, I'll have an opportunity, because I'll make an opportunity to go deeper and ask questions. And so that's what I'm going to do. Because on the flip side, some of the people I talk to every day are white, like, and not just my husband, I kind of live with him, so I have to, but like my friends that live in Denver, that live in Oklahoma, that live in Dallas, that live in Houston, that we're on Marco Polo and we text literally every day. So I have been talking to the same people for the most part that I've been talking to for years, every day, as far as non-Black people. But then there are a few people that I'm friends with them, but we don't really talk, that have reached out with these particular messages around like this, self-care. I don't know, exactly what you described. Now for those, again, I get it because I'm a human and I get it and whatever. And so I'm really trying to focus on, sometimes you can do the right thing for the wrong reason. And that's a start. And Richard Rohr says in this book about wheat and the flowers coming up at the same time. And so sometimes you can, it says, we need a lot of patience and humility to live in a field of both weeds and wheat of our own souls. So if I just cut off these people who are trying, I don't think that that's the right way either. So I'm like you, Deborah, I'm like, you know what? I'm checking myself over here and saying, it's okay. Be open and just stay engaged, because if I'm not engaged, I have no opportunity to educate and make any sort of difference. So just be open and stay engaged.
I'd like to make an observation that I think that part of the tie between coronavirus and why people are suddenly so attentive to this is not as much just being bored, but I think as a global community, we fully understand now what it feels like to be helpless. And I don't think everybody understood that before. I was at the march last night, and I will admit, when Black Lives Matter first started, I was like, I thought this was about equality. Like, shouldn't we all matter? Like, I thought that was like, this is what I'm showing up for, is that we all matter. But I've completely changed my tune. I thought like the whole white privilege thing was overblown. And again, like, we live in Houston, like, what an amazing multicultural, like, this is my experience every day, and that's not everyone's experience. What I saw yesterday was everyone behaving very well. And then when the march was over, and I'm sorry, I also have been like crying every day. When the march was over, the tensions are still really high, and they don't know what to do with all of this energy. And they just start antagonizing the policemen that are standing there protecting our right to speak freely. Like, that was the only reason they were there, and it seemed so counterproductive. And so I was like, this is not why I'm here, and I stepped away. And then what I saw on the next police barrier was some really young white kids, and this is where I really saw white privilege the most in my life, because these kids have no fear of cops. They were literally throwing water bottles at them, and the cops are just standing there and taking it. And I'm like, that's white privilege to me. Like, the fact that you're not even thinking that there will be a consequence.
Yeah, my husband said something very interesting. And I think the reason my husband, God bless him, my dad told me when I was young, he said, it's going to take a special kind of man to be married to you. And I was like, what do you mean? Well, now I know what he means. I'm sure my husband will echo that. The reason that he said, I know what it's like to be a minority, because I literally lived, he was in Teach for America, in the Mississippi Delta, where everybody in the town, every person who was in power was Black. And I was the white person there. And I grew up in Chicago, and I was taught in my house the importance of people are people, like, for real. And my first friends were like the people who lived across the street, like kids in proximity. So, and they just happened to be Black. And so his experience, even though he's a white man, and if you just look at him, you wouldn't know any of this, is very different from even a lot of people that he knows. And so one of the things he said last night, to the point about Black Lives Matter and people saying, well, all lives matter. I won't cuss. I won't say exactly what he said, but he said,
that's all you want.
Else doesn't mean that England. And he said, it's like people think that in their head, like it's a zero-sum game. So Black Lives Matter has to mean, he's like, no, when you talk about saving the whales, no one thinks that you mean kill all other animals. Like, no one thinks that. No person thinks that. But when it comes to this, that seemed to be the sentiment that if you say Black Lives Matter, that means you're saying that other lives don't. Same thing with equity. He's an attorney. So I say, if you be arrested for throwing a water bottle at a police officer, then everyone who throws water bottles at police officers should be arrested. The problem is it's not equitable. Right. So no one will be complaining if you commit the crime, and no matter who you are, you face the same repercussions, but that's not the reality. And there are volumes of words you can read on literally same exact crime, only difference, person of color, vastly different sentences. What is the explanation for that? There is no explanation for that, period. But race. You can say it or not say it, but that's what it is. And so this is the sentiment. So I'm glad, Chelsea, that you were able to see that and be like, just have your eyes cleared. We all get a little foggy from time to time, because that's exactly it. Like, you can throw a water bottle at a police officer and in your soul have no even thought of like anything ever happening.
And that's just it. Like, our experience our experience like growing up shapes our life so much. Like,
Yeah.
I'm curious what the first conversations y'all had with your parents are, because I'm very aware that like my lineage, like my grandparents were super racist. My mom was aware of that, but she didn't know how to speak to me about it. So my first experience, I've lived around a lot of Hispanic people growing up, living in Houston. I was at a private school, and I remember the first Black girl in my class. So my experience was, this person looks different from me, and their parents are from a different place, because I was around Hispanic people mostly. And so when the first Black girl was in my class and we would line up for pee, and I was sitting behind her, and I'm like, where are you from? And she's like, I'm from here. And I'm like, I don't think so. Because like, I just didn't understand. Like, I just assumed that people look different from me, were from different places. And it's because my mom didn't know how to explain it to me and just left it up to me to understand. So in moments like me seeing the water bottle being thrown, like, I just have to have these experiences to understand, because we don't understand what we don't do. So
Question, because this is what you said brings up something that I hear all the time, and I'm mystified by it a lot in life. So I'll say that because I am. I'm like, I don't understand that. So I'm curious. What does it mean from a white person's perspective when you say my mom didn't know how to talk to me about it? I don't know. I don't feel like I have a clear understanding on what that means.
Absolutely. Well, I think it kind of bounces back to the white fragility book. I think that we know there's a problem and that we don't understand the experience. And how can we speak to an experience that we don't understand? I think it's more helpful to say, I don't understand this, than just not to talk about it at all. And I think this is what's been missing, is that we're afraid to have this conversation. I was dating.
Language is important though, because I don't understand gives anybody who says that that's different from I'm uncomfortable. I don't understand and I'm uncomfortable are two totally different things. I don't understand means literally the concept is something that is foreign to me, and I don't have the data to be able to make sense logically of it. That's I don't understand. I'm uncomfortable means I know what it is. It makes me uncomfortable, therefore I don't want to talk about it. So this is my question. Is it I don't understand, or is it I'm uncomfortable? Because those are different things in my mind.
There are different things. And I think in this, they're colliding. And I've seen it from both ends. I dated a Black guy for a few years, and when he would be on the phone with his friends, he would say things sometimes, and you get a look on his face, and he'd turn and look at me and be like, I'm sorry I said that in front of you. And it seems like there's just ways that we behave within our like family groups that when we come together and we haven't had the conversations and we feel like it's a taboo topic. Even with my boyfriend, and we were together for quite a few years, it never really got past the point of when he would say something and like apologize to me while he was on the phone, we still would never have that conversation. I don't know why. I don't know why, honestly. And I'm so glad that we're starting to now. Whatever it took to make this happen, we need to identify where this is coming from and what to do about it. Because we honestly like
discomfort, Chelsea. I don't think it's understanding. I think it's discomfort. And I think that as a marketer and as a communicator, clear language is critical, because when words mean things, they do. Yeah. I understand is different from this makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't want to cut Shavonnah off, but I just want to push back with Chelsea just a little bit more. I love that you're starting to examine on this idea of white privilege and reevaluate things. So by no means am I kind of condemning you or attacking you in any way. But I would say that I want to say that white privilege is the fact that you didn't have to have that conversation. Right? Like, is that it didn't even come at an action as far as a water bottle or like how we relate. It is the fact that you got the privilege of being able to opt out of having those kind of conversations. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we're watching the town hall meeting on Sesame Street on racism on Saturday, right? And that's because I have to start those conversations with my Black son at 3 years old. I have to talk to him about the fact that he can't do things other people can do. You know, I have to sit down with my 7-year-old and say, you're Black in this country and it's going to be harder for you. And because of that, these are the actions I need you to take. You know, prior to any conversation I've had with her about the police, riding in a car with me at 5 years old, she said to me, uh-oh, mommy, there's a cop, right? And this is without any conversation, is that this world around her is already informing her in so many ways that if I do not talk about it, it is negligent for me as a Black mother. And I think that is the root, right? That is the epitome of white privilege. And so I think that you're starting to pull back those layers, and that's great. And I think that there's work to be done in really examining how deep and how riddled this country is with inequity.
Yeah.
Which makes sense for why this comment, Shavonnah, about understanding versus uncomfortable. I really like this idea because there are different language systems that we're using, and what I'm hearing you say is that it feels very invalidating to have somebody say, I don't understand. Whereas to own something is, this makes me extremely uncomfortable. I'm confused. Help me understand.
Invalidating, but also, so I think it's important to say my core values, and I've done all these assessments. It's like growth and truth. I think when I say words matter, and y'all will, you'll know more about this as we work together, they literally matter. So you have the literal meaning, then you have context. Well, if you are shaking on the literal meaning, then you might as well forget the context part. It leads to confusion. So I think it's not even that it's invalidating. I don't know if it's the truth. Because at that point, it's not about validating me. Is that actually true? It's the question. And I do it to myself too. Like when I was having these feelings, I'm like, what is this? And why do I feel like this? So I think that's the difference. For example, I'll use a different example. Before I got married, my husband and I sat down with our bank statements and our credit reports, and we had this very robust, we weren't even engaged actually, very robust conversation about finance. Because we were both later in life, other relationships, whatever, and now we're getting married. And it was very important to me that we get married having a conversation about one of the top things that people end up ending marriages about, very plainly. So in my mind, credit report just tells me you pay your bills on time. Bank statement tells me how you spend your money. Both are important to me and to us. So this is what we did. When we talked to other couples about when they got together, it's like the one thing that many people, not everybody, but many people don't talk about is money. Well, why don't you talk about it? Because they're uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because it's exposing, and I have to really say, well, yeah, I kind of did get into some debt. Using that lighter example to say, I think when it comes to race, that's what it's about. I think it's not about people don't understand, because even if no one had a conversation with you, by the virtue of the example that Debra gave, as a child, you pick up, you see things. So you see that there's inequality. You may not know why at that point, but then over the years, you get informed. And I think what happens is people feel uncomfortable. And I think if you're uncomfortable, just say, I'm uncomfortable because it makes me uncomfortable. I think people are like, okay, let's talk about it. But when people keep saying, I don't understand, when it's not a complex issue to understand, it seems like we're not going to ever get to the truth, because it's like there's no acceptance of like what is, so we can build from there. That's what it feels like.
I'll speak for myself. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I'll speak for myself. Hi, I'm Ariel, and for me it is that I am uncomfortable, right? I'll own that for sure. There's a part of me that just doesn't. I'm uncomfortable, and there's another part that I think is also playing here, which is I also feel powerless. Like I feel like I don't have a solution, and that makes me even more uncomfortable, because it's not like I have a very clear vision of how to fix this, right? Which I think we need to feel like we need to do together, but it's also like I'm uncomfortable, and it's not like I have something. I feel like I don't have some positive way to contribute beyond my friendship and beyond my willingness to engage and to try to go past my discomfort. It's like, okay, so it's like kind of like I go down the road a little bit too far. Probably this is my own thing, is like I go, okay, well, I don't know what the next thing is, but the first thing is I need to step out of the discomfort, right? And I think that's what we're doing here.
Can I ask?
And I think don't minimize just friendship. Don't minimize just saying, I see you. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's just to be seen. It's not, no one is asking shit. None of us know. We don't know nobody knows how to solve for this, but it's not it's not about the solution. It's like, let's just be together first. Like, let's just see each other first. And the solution is going to be collective. We're not even, that's like 18 steps down the road. But I think sometimes people underestimate the comfort and the support that's given when you just say, I see you. That's fucked up. That's it. I don't know. And let's just sit here. It's like grief. It's just no different when someone dies. I mean, you don't have a solution for that. Well, you might, but not that I know of so far. You don't have a solution for that, right? But it doesn't mean you don't go and support the person who's mourning, because it's you're showing, you're just being with them. You're just being, you're not doing, you're just being.
Can I also ask, when you say you're uncomfortable, I'm gonna now do what Shavonnah did. What, if you could place like a root of where that discomfort comes from, where does it come from?
For me, I'm sorry, were you asking Ariel? I'm gonna stop talking.
I mean, I think I'm asking in general, but aiming it towards Ariel just because we were already talking, but I think it's an open question.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll say that the discomfort for me is like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Like, it's not a comparison game. There's a part of it that's like, it's like on a fundamental level, I don't think there's a, like, I feel like we're all the same thing. Like, we are all in the same boat, and we are all of the same essence. And so I want to be able to say that, but I also understand that I don't have the same like experience. I'm not afraid to speed when I'm driving down the highway, because I might get killed by being pulled over, right? I can go speed, and the worst thing that could happen is I get a ticket, right? Right? That's my worst fear, right? So I also understand, like, yes, we are the same, but we don't have the same experience. And so part of the discomfort is like, I don't even know what I don't know. And I know that I don't know. That's part of it.
So there's a thing that I always tell my daughter, because she suffers with really bad anxiety, because she got that from her mom, and I just say, like, play it all the way out, right? Like, so if at its worst, what happens? You say the wrong thing, then what, Ariel?
Then I'm racist. Then
then you apologize.
No, then you're not, right? Then someone gets offended, right? Like, that's the first step, right? Then someone is going to get offended by it, and that offense is going to cause you to apologize. And then after that apology, they're going to explain to you why they were offended, and then you all are going to end up on a higher ground because of it, or they're going to part ways with you. But either way, you're going to leave with the knowledge that informs you to not make the decision to say that again, right? And I think, like, if we can get in the mindset of really playing things all the way out and saying, like, what I'm giving power to is this barrier that gives me an excuse to not engage. And the reality is if I really went there, and if it was the worst case scenario, someone would get offended, and I would learn what not to say, and I would be better the next time, right? And then my actions going forward would prove to that person later on that I was always the person that I was in the first place. And most people are really forgiving and come back to you, or if they don't, maybe they're not people who are supposed to be there for the season of your life. But either way it goes, you take away the power that being uncomfortable gives you. And I think, like, that's where we need to be. We need to be at a place where we're saying we're able to kind of, the same way that, I get up every morning and say, I'm not going to give life to the skepticism. I'm not going to give power to the discomfort. I'm going to take the first step, right? I'm going to start the conversation, or I'm going to say, I don't know, right? A lot of my LGBTQ friends, I have a lot of discomfort around things that are changing, not because I have a problem with their lifestyle or with who they are, but because I'm always scared I'm going to say the wrong thing. And so then I say, I don't know what to say right now. Can you explain to me what's the proper way to articulate this? Or I want to understand, and I ask a question instead of making a statement, right? It doesn't excuse me from my ability to engage. It just means the way that I engage has to happen differently, but it still has to happen.
I think that addresses one of the core things, is fear of fucking up. And so the fear of fucking up keeps everybody way too careful, way too fragile, way too sensitive. And that's interpreted, understandably, through the lens of, what are you doing? You're not doing shit. Like, what? And so that's why I like that title of the book. Shavonnah, you got activated on that one. What's up?
Well, because this is the thing. And my friend, I have a good friend who tells me, he's like, you don't think like everybody else. Number one thing he says, I'm going to beat it into your head until ever. You do not think, because my point is this. everybody wakes up and we got some ideas about what we think is going to happen, but ultimately no one knows what's going to happen. Everyone's just kind of trying to figure everything out, like every day. Like there is no manual that says do this, say this, and like no one knows. So the fear of I'm afraid of making a mistake is such a limiting belief, not for me, because for you, John, it's like, I just feel like, who would you be? What would you do? What causes, what actions, what things would you do? What would you create if you just dropped that? Because nobody knows. Nobody knows. I think people feel like somebody has the right thing to say, and maybe Oprah can say it. Nobody knows. Oprah's just winging it too.
That's right.
She is. We all are. We don't know what's going to happen in 3 minutes. 3 minutes from now, we have no idea what's going to happen. But it's like we let the belief that we got the wrong information. Someone else has the right information. So we'll just be quiet because we don't want to say the wrong information. I just think that's a limiting belief. That's such a limiting belief, not just about race, but about you. Like you limit yourself as a human when you let that prevail. That's why I got triggered. Not even about this. It's just like that is a trigger for me, because I'm like, we collectively could be so much more if we just got past that.
Yeah.
I love the simplicity of the solution of don't make a statement, ask a question. I feel like that would solve so many problems that we have having this conversation, because we want to assume that we know something, and it's true, none of us really knows how to fix this problem. So let's start asking each other.
I know, just so we can note this, I know that 2 of us are going to drop out because we got patients. So I want to note that, and then we'll keep going as long as we can. Later, guys. See y'all later.
Thank you. Thank you
Layla
so
Scott
much.
was going to say something earlier, and I like way earlier now. But I want you to say. I think it was around the question of we were talking about what does it mean when people say, where it was the uncomfortable versus I don't know what to say, and I think it was around that time. But I know you were going to say something, and then we all start talking. So
Thank you. That's good. I've been listening. Well, to go back to the first thing I was going to say, it had to do with why now. And,
why now?
Right now, obviously the pandemic, just for me, I've been busier than ever during this pandemic. And prior to the pandemic, up to present, I don't read the paper. I don't go on the internet and troll the news. I don't watch the news. I don't listen to the news. If news makes its way to me, it's because it's that big that somebody told me, right? And so as somebody who is unaffected as much as I can possibly be by these news channels, I can only know what I feel, which is where I prefer to stay. Part of me feels ashamed that I don't know more facts about each of these incidences and about so many other things. But what I do know is that I lead from my heart, because of that. I'm going with what I feel. And in terms of the fact that is it just so quiet and now this is getting airtime, to me, as I said, I'm busier than ever, but there's something about maybe there's less ripples in the water in general. So that the notion of the most dangerous person in this equation is the compassionate yet silent white person. That is me, and to jump to the communication piece, it's not that I don't have a rage about it and a willingness to speak out about it, but I feel so confused because if and when I do, and this happened back in the election, when I am outspoken, I'm either speaking into an echo chamber with people who already think like I do, or there's somebody who's completely of an opposite heart and mind, right? And they're just going to argue with me. And then there's the people in between staying quiet. And I don't feel like the needle moves. And so, obviously we're not going to end this podcast with a solution, but I feel a bit like John often talks about that analogy of, a fish doesn't know what's in the water. It was always in the water. I feel aware that I'm in the water, but I don't know how to communicate, what to do next. I do vote, you know what I mean? Like I do what I think I know I can do, but I want to do more. And And I think the reason I want to do more now as opposed to any other time is because that water is a little stiller for some reason. And I don't know.
That's good.
Before y'all answer though, I kind of want to piggyback off of that, because I think leading off of those unknowing and confusion, I'm finding that a lot of the people within my, at least social network community, have this confusion between same thing, wanting to do something, but then misunderstanding or being misinformed that supporting the cause also means supporting the violence and the riots. And again, coming from a place of not being in this position, still learning, I struggle with tackling saying like, the riots aren't the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. But then they keep saying like, well, I understand Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, but the protesting's not cool. The riots aren't cool. And then I don't know, I feel a lack of words and information to share that it's not about that.
So I'll put it. Siobhan, do you want to go, Siobhan?
No, please, you go.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm a Christian as well, and I define it very much the same way that I think about religion, as far as I can believe in Christ and not support colonialism, right? Like that those things have innately been tangled in so many ways for so long. And that for me, I still have to divide the fact that Christian values, belief, and religion has been used to oppress. But that doesn't mean that Christianity in and of itself is the problem. It means that in the hands of people, it has become the problem, right? And the way that it has been used as a tool and as a weapon, it has become a problem. And I think that that's like the defining factor, right? Is that you can support a cause and not support every action that comes out of that cause. That's the first thing. I would also say is that the majority of the rioting isn't by the people who are of the cause, right? And I think that as that's starting to come more to light, people are realizing that in a lot of instances that has been the case, right? I cleaned up after the LA riots when Rodney King was beaten. And I was 7 years old. I remember going out and putting on this orange jumpsuit and cleaning up ashes after they looted the streets and burned down Black communities. And it wasn't Black people doing it, right? And I'm not saying that there wasn't at least, one or two looters that were, taking advantage, but the majority of it did not come from people who lived there burning their own communities. That was a lie, right? The reality was there was a lot of people who took the advantage of chaos and used it to wield damage. And so I think that, as much as we're like, I hear Layla say, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to move. I think, when we enter with a question, it's still the same thing. It's, well, why don't you believe with that? Well, have you considered? Well, if we looked at this instance, in this instance, do you think that might shed light on what you want to believe? Now, there's going to be some people who are always going to disagree with you, and that's fine. But what happens when the quiet people begin to speak is that you give permission for other quiet people to speak, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't know what other quiet person is in that room that leverages a greater power, greater access, or anything that may change the tide in a room full of people who may be more influential, or that they are more influential themselves. And so it's important that none of us become complicit, but that we all find a space, even in our very, even if it's wearing a button on your shirt or something, right? I think of the 1968 Olympics, and we always see that image, right, of the two guys with the Black Power fists, and we always look at them. But the person who was in third place was also protesting, right? He had a lapel pin that was in support of their movement because of his country. He would have been extradited had he put his fist up. And so he did what worked for his limitations in being able to support their cause. And I think that that's what we need to do. We need to find out what are the things that we can do, that we can control, that we can affect, and figure out how to leverage those. Shavonnah, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to say this. I want to ask the question, because I don't know the answers to this, and y'all might know this. Can we think of any other massive change that has happened in modern history that did not involve some sort of protest and some sort of riot and some, I can't think of one. And I've been thinking about it. I'm like, okay, was there another time in any, like not even just in America, but where this unrest for some people, because that's the best tool they have. That's the only tool they have. Then you have the people who take advantage of the chaos. That's just humanity. But one thing that I was going to read is choosing the path to freedom always means taking a risk-filled route. So I think when we really, for me at least, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but my perspective is a lot of what I hear people saying is my comfort, my social standing, and my convenience are more important to me at the time than X, whatever X is. Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, you know, what anything, any of the things. And I think it's the ownership of that. It's the ownership of that. It's the ownership of that we all have different priorities. I get that. We all have different ways that we can affect change. And we need all of it. We don't need just people protesting. We don't need people just writing letters or just making phone calls or just what we need people contributing at their highest point of contribution for them in a way that they feel like they can do it and they can sustain it. I think what we end up having is a lot of shrinking back because people say things like this happened in Stapleton, Colorado. Stapleton, the person was a very, very racist person. And there was a petition and that was on their act. It wasn't just a petition. It was it was on their latest election to change the name of the town. Change the name of the town because this is like, why wouldn't we do this? And I know people who were going door to door knocking to say, hey, we want to do this. We have the money to pay. Like, we want to do this because we believe that we don't want to be named after a racist. Like, we just want to change it. And there were only 8% of people voted for that proposition. About that. And so one of the people that I know said that in a different environment, they had the opportunity to ask people, like, they were very upset that not only that it did not pass, that only 8% of the people thought that was a worthy thing to even be thinking about. So they asked, why didn't you know, what was up with that? Like, tell me, I want to understand why did you not want to vote to do this? And people said things like, well, then I'd have to change my driver's license. Then we'd have to pay for street signs. This is real shit. This is what people say. And so this is and these are people that if you met them on the street, if I met them on the street, they'll be normal. They wouldn't think that they were racist. They don't do anything. But it's like, that's a level of complicity that we were dealing with where it's like, people literally say things like that. Like, I don't know what to do. What do you mean? Like, there are like 50 billion things that can be done. And I think Leslie Scott, you made a good point where people say, I think impact, we got to get past that too. I don't know what to do because it doesn't feel big enough. And it doesn't have to be big. It could be a small thing because little conversations here and there, you know, me talking to one person, then that person talking to another person, and then they talk to 3 people. That's how you really start to propagate a message and really get down to the nitty gritty. It doesn't have to be a big sweeping, you know, protest or you built this. I mean, it doesn't have to be big. It just has to be consistent, I think.
That's a really good point. You know, that's a really good point because the people who are commenting back are giving anyone who's doing this probably the feedback of I either agree with you or I disagree with you. The people who you might be getting to seesaw right over to the side of compassion and understanding or curiosity even, they might not be saying anything, so it feels like you didn't do anything, but maybe you still did.
You do. It all matters. I say this all the time. It all matters. Everything matters. It all adds up and it matters. I asked the question, and Deborah, I love what you said about, and I think Chelsea, you said this too, maybe we ask questions instead of make statements. I had a friend, we're talking about a completely separate issue, but kind of it dovetailed into this. And it was around legacy systems in schools. There's schools who say, Rodney went there, so therefore his kid can go there, therefore his grandkid can go there, right? Legacy system. And we were having this conversation weeks ago, and I was like, that doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't promote diversity. And I wasn't just talking about diversity of color, just in general. It just doesn't promote diversity. And then we circled back to that conversation. And in the conversation, I just asked the question. And this is a person who was, you know, kind of pro, even though they were like, yeah, well, I kind of get that. So I asked the question of, what do legacy systems protect? And they, on their own, they thought about it and they came back and they had done some research and they said, you know what? That our conversation changed my opinion about it. And they're a person that is in a position of influence and they're community. And so now they were like, and I'm going to talk to such and such about this. And I'm actually going to talk. I mean, so just that one question was enough that they were inspired to do research, to really question and challenge their own beliefs. And then without me saying anything but that question, say all the things that they were going to do and that they're going to do to challenge that, because they kind of see it as bullshit now. So it all matters. I just give that example to say, you'd be surprised what people take as inspiration that really moves any cause forward, especially one like we're dealing with today.
Noted. Thank you.
And I feel like we just accept our reality that we're presented with so hard that if somebody doesn't ask us the right question, we'll never change anything. I think that's amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's something to be said, exactly what you're saying, Shavonnah, about scale and what we can affect. And sort of what I see as a Jungian analyst is that people are only able to sort of sit with conflict externally if they're able to sit with their own conflicts internally. That people's own relationships to the various parts of themselves directly translates into politics, into religion, into the way they interact in the world. And so helping people become more versed with exactly what you were saying, with labeling what's going on inside them, with understanding those things, with understanding those internal conflicts, helps sort of an external interaction with those kinds of conflicts.
Rodney, that y'all would think that I'm getting paid from Richard Rohr. I'm not. In this book, though, he says something about once you have established your center, you are less protective of your boundaries. And he went on to say in that is that we are not centered. We don't know who we are. And so we cannot relate to him because we're struggling and trying to suss this out internally. And that just stuck with me. So if I'm centered, I can answer any question. I can talk about anything because it's not bumping up against my personhood. Even if I've done something that was dumb or said something that was dumb, it's like, I can say, you know what, that was a mistake. I'm sorry. Help me understand, to Deborah's point, so I can go on and be better. But we got to be willing to do that. And we got to be centered to even have the space, I think, mental space, to not feel this shame and fear. Because shame and fear can be a very selfish thing. It just keeps us swirling around ourself without looking externally. I mean, we don't have time. Because people spend their lives in this cycle. Shame, fear, repeat. But when we can get centered for a second and say, what is going on here? I think that's the path. And listen to ourselves first, right?
I would also say, I think that's the part of allyship that we don't pay enough attention to. Yes, allyship should be sacrificed in some way, and it should be asking yourself, what are you willing to risk, right? Like, what am I willing to move out of the way to make room for someone else? But it also should be, how can I use the relationship that allyship should build to become a better ally, right? And so I think I was teaching at a school, and we had, it was a Catholic school, and one of the priests, he was like, every time I feel like I'm messing this race thing up, like every time, right? And like, I want to make space, but I need you to help me do so. So, if you're comfortable, I want to be a person who I can come and ask dumb questions to you, like questions that I am not allowed to ask anybody else because they're offensive. And I need you to know, because you know who I am, that where I'm asking that question out of is a place of absolute ignorance and is not out of a place of maliciousness, right? And so I became that person for him, right? Where he would come in and he'd be like, I had 2 Black students and they used the N-word and it made me really uncomfortable. And I was like, well, what made you uncomfortable, right? And we took time to unpack that. And I was like, understand that it's not what you think it is when they use the words like in between relation, right? And then I was like, but also, it can also say that the classroom maybe isn't a space for that word either, right? So like, we can do both of those things. We can find a way to approach it that still preserves their cultural ability to use that word and to wield it and to repurpose it if that's what they choose to do. And we can also honor that there's appropriateness of space, right? And that them using that word here gives permission to other people to use it. And if you start asking that question, their actions are going to change, not at you, but as taking this kind of self-reflective, centered space that Shavonnah is talking about, right? And so I think for us is also thinking through allyship in the, how can I learn from the relationships that I've built, right? If I know that this is the character that I've proven, how can I find those people that I can ask questions of and ask, can I borrow your ear and just run this by you? And not to say that they're like the expert in all things Black, right? Because they're not a monolith, but they may be able to give you insight if you're willing to listen in an approach that you may not have considered before.
Have you seen any systems, like I feel like part of the problem where you're like in a school is you have to make rules that apply to everyone. Like, have you seen systems that really preserve the like different but equal mentality? Like, how do we let people hang on to their cultural differences and still make everybody feel comfortable and safe? Like, that's the thing that I think is hard to bridge, maybe.
Are there cultural things that are in direct conflict? Like, I'll ask you, like, what cultural things do you think are in direct conflict?
So the fact that you're saying, like, maybe in a classroom, this isn't a place for this word, but you should still be able to say it. Like, where do we draw these lines of letting people express themselves, which I'm also an artist, I think is very important. I don't think we're ever going to get anywhere if we can't express ourselves openly and honestly. But at the same time, I don't think that language, I think there's some systems like schools where language kind of has to be policed. And I think that we really struggle with that
I was like, the word police wrestled something in me in the wrong way. I would say no, not at all. I mean, I can only speak from my experience, and by no means am I master teacher 101. But one thing that I have been able to accomplish in my classrooms is a real feeling of openness and of acceptance, and that I will like pat myself on the back for a little bit. And we start every semester I teach, I start with a classroom contract. And it's not one that I come up with. We sit at a big table with a huge piece of butcher paper, right? I have kids work in small groups, and they come up with a list of their top 5 rules that they feel like have to happen in order for them to have a safe learning environment, right? Is it that you need to have water breaks every 15 minutes, right? Like, is it that you need to be able to bring a stuffed animal to school? Like, stupid things, right? To the, like, do people need to call you by a nickname that your grandmother gave you because that makes you feel safer in this space? And they go through it, and then we go to the board and we write every idea down, no matter how crazy it is. And then I have them go back and prioritize. And I'm like, you now only get to pick 5 of these. 5 that you think really will transform this space into being something that is worthwhile, right? And then they write it on a piece of paper, they switch groups, and I'm like, take from those 5 your top 3, right? We whittle it down, and then we think about what rules can be combined with other rules that are incorporate them. So I don't have to say let everyone talk if I say respect everyone, right? I can make those broader terms that we can all appeal under, and then I take them and post them on the wall, and everybody comes up with a pen and signs it as a contract. And anytime one of those rules are broken, I'm like, hey, number 3, fam, like, we all agreed to this. This wasn't something I came up with. This is something you said that you wanted to do. And every time I've had students say, I'm sorry, my fault. You're right.
You know what? I think I love that you do that in your class. And what came up for me when you were saying that was 2 things. One, the problem I feel like we have in America is that there is a rule book, there is a set of rules, but we weren't invited to participate in drafting them.
Correct.
And they're on the board, but you get an exception and you get held to the letter of the rule. That's the first problem. The second problem is time. Because if you don't value, the only reason that Deborah's doing that is because she values the input of everyone in her class. So when you come to our office, you'll see we have team agreements on the board, and then we went through the same exercise. Team agreements. It takes time to foster trust and to promote that I value and I see you, and people don't have time. White people historically have not had time. Well, why is that the case? Because you don't value not you, Chelsea, but like collectively, the opinions of others wasn't valued. And I think that's what it comes down to. I think it's there people, and we know this, y'all know this, especially for the work you do. When someone is a part of a process, they're more likely to comply with and abide by the rules of the process.
Right.
Period.
For sure. Well,
Period.
I think that's what I mean when I'm saying, we're fish in water. Like, we know we're not going to have the complete solution at the end of this session, but what ways can you think of that we, as well-meaning white people, how do we comply with those rules and drive that nail further into the coffin? Like, how do we undo this?
I would say, you say fish in water, but if enough fish swim in the same direction, they'll change the tide, right? Like, so don't make yourself as passive to that as that sounds, right? Is that you have actually quite a bit of leverage and a lot of power.
I mean, passivity, I mean,
yeah.
like, I didn't want to put on these blinders, but I was born with these you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to take them off. So when they're off, what am I seeing that I don't see normally?
I think it's,
Go ahead, Deborah.
Oh, I was going to say, I praise Chelsea in this way, because I think that it's once you see things, not turning away from them, right? And like being able to run into them and say, I see this problem, I see this differently. I was open to accept that maybe the ways that I perceive things prior to this have been wrong. And then to take that and to say to other people with their blinders on, like, hey, did you realize that we've all been looking at this the wrong way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that seems very simple, but it really is like the first step to things is being able to acknowledge that you have the blinders, to take them off, and then to not try to put them back on again, because it is so.
And I think that's a practical way. And I would add to that is to understand that it's going to be uncomfortable, but all change is, whether you're your eating habits or your meditation practice or yoga practice, it is going to be uncomfortable, and don't be afraid of the discomfort. I think number one. I also think that the part of the discomfort is what Rodney said earlier, is sitting with yourself. A friend told me they did this exercise like years ago, and I was like, that is brilliant. Or they wrote down all of the ways that in their life from 10, more prominent memories up through 50, all the areas where they had big milestones and big things that happened and where privilege played a part. And if it would have been different, if it could have been different. Again, it takes time, right? But I feel like we all should have time for this. And doing that exercise, they told me what was illuminated to them is that while they thought, I paid for myself to go to college because this other thing happened. They didn't realize, oh yeah, but my mom's friend who owned the business gave me a job. Well, if I were a different person, would I have had the access to a mom's friend who owns a business that can give me a job? Things like that. I mean, and they had a bunch of examples. Mm-hmm. So I think one tangible way too is just to own. That's what this book is about. White fragility is to own that we didn't all start at the same spot, and not for shame. It's flush that, but just own it. I have had advantages. Yes. As a tall woman, I have advantages that short women don't have. This just is. I do. And I just own it. And so own that first. That's the centering of yourself. And then say, okay, now how do I move forward? And then I think the next thing is not being afraid to ask questions and finding that person. It's not going to be everybody, but finding that person or those few people that you can say, hey, I don't know this, but this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And bounce, just like you do any other friend. So really build relationships. I guess that's a short way of saying build relationships with people that are not like you on purpose, and know it's going to be uncomfortable, but that's okay. And just be purposeful about that, because I think when we get connected and we really see people, then we start to understand. We get a different perspective that you just cannot get from reading a book, or you got to be in a relationship with people that think differently about a lot of things, not just race. I think that's a step.
The thing that's helped me the most is to show up. I love that you brought up yoga, because I'll wake up in the morning and I'm so happy in my bed where I'm comfortable and no one can challenge me and I don't have to do anything hard. And then I get in the hot yoga studio. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And then at the end, I'm like, I got
so glad I did that.
So much I got out of it. And I also love that you said my experience as a tall woman. And it makes me realize that I'm also a tall woman, and there are privileges. And then there's also when you're in middle school and all the boys are tiny and you feel like a giant and really uncomfortable, we all have experienced feelings of prejudice. We should be able to understand what that feels like. And we've all experienced the way that the body that we're in shapes our experience. And we should be able to find these things that we connect on and start the conversation there. You've changed my mind again. It's true. We should be able to understand. I don't understand, I don't think is a valid excuse anymore.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to be careful of our time, but one thing I just came up to my mind was, I realized just the other day, it was wild. My friend was telling me the story about doing the lawn. And I had this thought, and I was like, I've never pushed a lawnmower, ever. I don't know how to start one. I've never pushed one. I never, ever in my whole life. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I've never pushed a lawnmower. So then I started thinking about it. I was like, why? I've lived in houses. Why have I never? Because I've had someone to do my yard. I've had the privilege of having someone my entire life do my yard. And I didn't think about it till like last week, that I never pushed the lawn more. Like it just didn't occur to me until we were having this conversation about her doing the lawn. I was like, my point is there are areas in our life where we have privileges in different ways. I think when it comes to race, there is a system that has been set up, not by any of us on the phone because we weren't alive, but there's a system that has been set up to give unfair, if we're just talking about equitable, privilege to certain people. That is a fact. And if you are the certain people, then you benefited from it. No different if the privileges were to tall people, then Chelsea, you and I'd be winning, right? Because we're tall. We would be benefiting from that privilege. We didn't set it up, but we're also not shrinking. We're enjoying it. Because that's good. Why wouldn't you? And so I think part of it too is just, that's it. Like we all have these points of privilege, some way more than others, but we have points of privilege that we act like don't exist, and that helps us to be able to say, well, I don't understand. No, you understand. It may be uncomfortable, but you can understand what it's like to have an unfair advantage in one area or another, and then you multiply that times a person's lifetime, and then you can start to understand how oppressive it can be.
Yeah, there's some things that have been so hard for me to wrap my head around. I moved to Atlanta when I was 15, and it's different. It is different. There was a much larger community there, and there was conversations that I was privy to that I would never have heard elsewhere. There was a girl who moved there from Mississippi, and they moved because people were literally burning crosses in her lawn and shining lights in her window. I didn't know that was the thing that was still happening. I bet it still happens today. And it's not part of my experience. I'm completely oblivious to it. And I cannot wrap my head around being in my home at night, trying to sleep. I worry about going to yoga in the morning. These people are worrying about maybe people throwing bricks or bullets through their windows. Like that's something that I can't even fathom. And I don't know how you handle that. It's crazy.
I mean, but I would even push farther than that and say, if we look at what just happened with Breonna Taylor, right? That it's not even in our beds, sleep what's happening outside, but it's what's happening inside to our homes. And that's because that's not the first time, right? Is that people have been shot in their beds while they were sleeping for reasons that no one can put their finger on, right? When we all sit down at the table.
And I think that's the frustrating part. And this is me, truth seeker over here. Stop fucking saying we can't put we know what it is. Until
I said it in quotation marks, right?
Yeah,
like, I don't
but it's like until collectively, I know what you meant, but collectively, until we just say, we have been racist, we have been sexist, we have been fill in the blank. Just say it. It's like there's such this weirdness about just call it as it is. Call those things, call it as it is, because then we can start to talk about, okay, now that was not good. What do we need to do to move forward? But if we can't call it, that's the centering. If we can't get to the point where we can just call it as it is, then it doesn't look hopeful for any sort of healing, because that you got to call it. What are we solving for? I mean, if you don't say what it is.
I want to drop a little bit of a bomb. Speaking of burning crosses, some of the people that I love and know identify as Christian and probably would never be on a call like this, would never want to ask the questions. Very small-minded. And that's not to speak for all Christians, because obviously you identify as Christian. I actually identify as Christian. But what do we say to our Christian friends who aren't asking themselves these questions? And
I say read the Bible, because here's the thing. I think the key to what you said is this. You said identify, yeah, right? Versus be. If you are a Christian, and that means that you believe that you have the Holy Spirit inside of you, and that is then informing how you interact with the world, there's some things that you can't do because they don't jive, period. Then if you say, what does the Bible say about widows and orphans? What does the Bible say about loving each other being the chief thing? So if the Bible says that loving our brother and sister is the primary thing we must do, is this act that I just did to my brother and sister love or not? That's real simple. If it's not, I got a gap that I got to close. Yeah. As a Christian, I think people who, I grew up Baptist, so I get it. I think as a Christian, we don't hold ourselves accountable for what the Bible says.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we did, there is no way, there's a way that just some things couldn't happen because it's in direct conflict with the Bible. And the Bible also talks about those that are on the meat of the word and those that are still on the formula. So some people never mature into who they could ultimately be because they don't do the work, because there's some work, self-reflection and things like that that's required. But I still think there's some baseline things that if my actions are opposite and I'm saying I'm a Christian, somebody's lying.
Right. I know. And that was my first meeting with Debra. We went to lunch and she wanted to pray over our meal. And it started us talking about what kind of Christian are you? It's not even just, are you Christian? What kind of Christian are you? Because often I don't want to be associated with that word.
I think people go to church, language matters to me. I think there are people who go to church because they grew up going to church and it's a habit and it's a thing that they do. And so then they say they're Christian, right? Like, I think that's just in all people. It's not just white people, it's people. And then I think there are people who are Christian by definition of, I am living my life according to what these things say in total. And there are people who aren't. And I think that just is. And I mean, of course, there are different things in the Bible you can wrestle with, but love and being loving to another person, human to human, that seems really, really, really straightforward to me. And a lot of what we're talking about as it relates to race is hate toward another human. So if a person says I'm Christian and then they are in agreement with the hate toward another human, Black or not, I just don't think they're actually Christian.
I think we're up against, number one, I think every tradition has at their root something about love and connection and honoring each other, because fundamentally belonging and connecting with each other is the lifeblood of our existence as human beings.
That's right.
And which is why this is such an affront, because we're talking about a horrid disconnection. And that has dead people throughout our entire human history at the root of this disconnection. And so I think that's so important to note, although, I mean, this would extend our conversation a lot longer. There's a book on my bookshelf right here called The Nazi Doctors. And what it's looking at is people who've taken the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. And one day when a woman was sitting there with a Nazi physician and the smokestacks are in the distance while people are burning, and the woman says, how do you reconcile your Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, with what you're doing as a Nazi? And the physician says, the Jewish person, like the gangrenous leg, needs to be cut off the body for service of the rest of the human. I mean, and that's where we get into a big bind here, because interpretation matters. I think that's so important, Shavonnah. Your emphasis constantly on language matters. We can misinterpret shit in so many different ways. We're looking at the same text, the same behavior, the same event, and we're having different perceptions. But one thing I love so much about what you're talking about is that by having the conversation, it starts to uncover certain unconscious aspects of myself. I didn't even realize I never pushed a lawnmower. I didn't even realize I did X, Y, or Z until we're able to dialogue in this way. That's what I'm so encouraged about, kind of what's happening. Why now? Well, yeah, because it's now, and because we're, I think, pushing into difficult conversations to try to understand what's off with me. How am I contributing to this? And I want to wrestle with that and struggle with that. And I think that's the thing that's hopefully going to stir this up and give us some degree of transformation. And I think that's what has, throughout our human history, always brought about some transformation. Before we jump, I want to be mindful, Shavonnah, of your time, because I know you've got
Yes, I'm looking
Yeah,
at
I was about to say I'm going to have to hang up then too.
Good. Well, I wonder if y'all could just close. What are we leaving out? What do we need to continue? How can we continue this on? We can close on leaving something open, by the way. So wherever y'all want to end it.
I'll say, I think what we're doing right now is what we need to continue to do. To come together in a safe space, ask questions, state opinions, just talk, and really, but with the mind, with the lens of, I really want to gain a deeper understanding of someone else's experience. And then once I know that, and I can connect with them on that level, and I can see them, I can just see them, I don't have to solve anything, I can just see them, then we can work together to figure out the next step. So it's just doing this step, just listening and coming together and seeing each other. I think that's huge.
I would say be willing to take the risk, right? Like whatever that means for you is, whether that's risking your comfort, whether that's risking your privilege, whether that's risking your time, right? Is being able to slow down and to listen enough to take the risk, and to realize that you may feel very hopeless and very helpless, but that there are things that you can do every single day that make the world a safer place for people who are in danger right now. And that could be something as simple as, the phone calls that we love to hate, right, about water. And it could be also something, as monumentous as really shifting and changing culturally, a large movement, and that those things happen in the same day, right? I think about like the parable of the sower and this kind of idea of like needing to fall on the right kind of ground, but also like that there had to be 3 different times that people came by and threw seed, right? Like that there has to be people who are constantly seeding, constantly watering, constantly harvesting, and that those people have different skill sets, have different commitments, have different, abilities, and that they're all needed in order to make things happen. And so I think just really being open to that. I think being informed and being educated. And so if that means talking to people, if that means picking up books, I know Shavonnah has recommended a few as well. I'm gonna be ashamed to say, I have a book as well that's centered around police brutality. But I mean, I think finding whatever that thing is for you that gives you the information that you need to be able to speak with confidence and to be able to quiet the discomfort, right? Because you'll feel more equipped the more that you know. And so I think that just like not running away from that and being willing to hold someone else's story in your heart and in your mind, and to wrestle with it yourself, and to then provoke people around you to wrestle with it.
Yeah. I'm looking for your book, Deep. I want to show it. But
I was like, there it is right there. Boom.
there it is. Yeah, that's right. I've got your book sitting. So if you saw it, so disorganized. I've got it somewhere. Leela's got to get it.
I was gonna grab it, but it's on my bedside table.
It's right there. It's behind you. That's awesome.
Y'all need to get this book. It is beautiful. And so we'll include something and a link, certainly, Deep, when we do this video cast. If you're listening and watching this, just click down on the link and you'll be directed to both Shavonnah and Deep's websites. Thank you all for being here. It's a blessing to be able to talk to you about this.
No, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This is great.